The cold had become too sharp even for late November. I woke up with the pain in my joints that had become an increasingly familiar companion over the years. At such times, Edith's absence was especially acute. She had always sensed when I was in pain and brought me a cup of hot tea with ginger and honey, even if I said nothing. Now I stared at the ceiling in silence, listening to the ticking of the old clock in the living room. It had been 2 years and 3 months since I'd been alone in our house. The house that Edith and I had bought almost 50 years ago when we first moved to Wallingford. It was where our only daughter Beatrice was born and raised. It held the memories of our entire lives. Every crack in the wall, every creaking floorboard, everything had a story. I struggled to get out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. My morning ritual was unchanged: coffee, toast, pills to take before meals. The doctor had prescribed them for my blood pressure, but I doubted they did much good. At 78, it's hard to fix anything. I looked out the window at my small but neat yard. The maple tree that Edith and I had planted the year we were married had dropped almost all of its leaves. Good thing I'd gotten them out before the frost. A neighbor boy, Peter, helped me with it for $10 and a pie I baked from Edith's recipe. Cooking became my salvation after she left. I'd never stood at the stove before. Edith wouldn't let me in her kitchen. Now, every new recipe I learned seemed like a small victory over loneliness. As I finished my coffee, I glanced at the picture of Beatrice on the dresser. It showed her about 5 years old, smiling, showing off her missing front teeth. Back then, she loved to climb into my lap and ask me to tell her another story about Princess Betty, a character I had invented especially for her. Where is that little girl now? The last time I saw her was 6 months ago for her birthday. Todd, her husband, barely graced me with a nod, and her grandchildren, Abigail and Pierce, spent the entire evening staring at their phones. Beatrice was polite but cold. It was as if she was doing her duty by inviting me over rather than actually wanting to see me. The conversation didn't go well, and I left earlier than I'd planned, citing fatigue. After Edith's death, everything changed. Her ancestral home in Providence, inherited from her parents, had to be sold. I couldn't keep 2 homes and pay the taxes. Edith kept that house for Beatrice, but when she married Todd, they bought their own in Wallingford, larger and more modern. The sale brought a considerable sum of money, almost $350,000. The money was sitting in an account. I hardly spent it, living on my pension and savings. I knew Beatrice and especially Todd were counting on those funds. Todd worked for an insurance company, but things hadn't been going so well in recent years. They'd taken out a big mortgage, sent the kids to private school. Beatrice had hinted a couple times that they were having a hard time with the payments, but I pretended not to understand. That money was the last thing Edith had left, and I didn't want to part with it. My phone rang unexpectedly loud, making me wince. It was Beatrice, which was rare. Usually we talked on my initiative and not very often. "Hi, Daddy," she sounded strangely warm. "How are you?" "Slowly," I answered. "My knees are a little sore, but that's normal." "Listen, I have an idea," she continued without much interest in my knees. "Thanksgiving's coming up. We've decided to have a big dinner. Todd invited his co-workers from work, and I invited a couple of girlfriends with their husbands. Why don't you come over? The kids would love it." I was quiet for a moment, considering her suggestion. I usually spent Thanksgiving alone after Edith died. Last year I ordered a turkey at a restaurant and ate it with frozen mashed potatoes and bourbon. It was depressing. "Dad, are you here?" Beatrice asked impatiently. "Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been thinking." "Of course I'll come. Thank you for inviting me." "That's great." I could hear the relief in her voice. "Come by Thursday at 4 o'clock. We're planning dinner for 6 o'clock. After the call, I sat staring into the void for a long time. The invitation came as a surprise. Maybe Beatrice had decided to mend her relationship. We'd been estranged for years. After Edith's death, I'd withdrawn into myself and Beatrice had been too busy with her family. Or perhaps she was just embarrassed that her elderly father would be spending the holiday alone. Whatever her motives, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe all was not lost and we could rebuild what had once been between us. I remembered little Beatrice running toward me when I came home from work. How we built birdhouses together for the backyard. How I taught her how to ride a bicycle. That all changed when she went to college. Edith was sick for the first time then, and Beatrice, instead of supporting us, seemed distant. Maybe it was hard for her to see her mother sick. Maybe she was afraid of losing her. I never asked. And then she met Todd, got married, had children, and our meetings became even more infrequent and formal. The thought of a possible reconciliation warmed my heart. I decided that I should prepare myself for the visit, renew my closet, buy gifts for my grandchildren, maybe even get a haircut. The old barber Joe still had his little barber shop on Maple Street. The next day, I went to the mall. The years were taking their toll, and shopping was harder on me than it used to be. My legs were getting tired fast, and the bright lights and noise were giving me a headache. But I was determined to find the perfect gifts. For Abigail, who was turning 15, I chose a silver bracelet with a small pendant in the shape of a book. Beatrice had once mentioned that her daughter had a passion for reading. For Pierce, 13, I bought him a model airplane kit, the kind he and I used to build together when he was younger and still interested in hanging out with me. Hopefully, this nostalgic reference will help us find common ground. In the men's clothing department, I picked out a new sweater and pants. The sales clerk, a woman about my age, helped me with size and color. "The burgundy will accentuate your eyes perfectly," she said with a smile that reminded me of Edith. I thanked her and hurried toward the exit, feeling an unsolicited lump in my throat. At home, I carefully wrapped the gifts in holiday paper depicting turkeys and maple leaves. My fingers aren't as dexterous as they used to be, and the process took longer than I'd hoped. But the result was worth the effort. The bags looked dressy and festive. The week before Thanksgiving dragged on for an excruciatingly long time. I reread several times the recipe for the apple pie I was going to bake and bring for dinner. Edith always made it for the holidays, and everyone loved it. I hope Beatrice will appreciate the gesture. The night before the trip, I hardly slept at all. I rolled around in bed, imagining how it would go. I imagined Beatrice's warm embrace, the smiles of her grandchildren, even Todd's discreet but respectful handshake. I dreamed of casual conversations around the table, of Beatrice asking me to tell stories from her childhood, and my grandchildren listening with interest. About how we would all play board games together after dinner, just like old times. In the morning, I got up earlier than usual, took a long shower, shaved thoroughly, put on new clothes. Baking the cake, I followed the recipe with the precision of a surgeon measuring the ingredients to the gram, timing them to the second. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled the house, bringing back memories of holidays when Edith had been alive and Beatrice had been a little girl eagerly awaiting dessert. After wrapping the cooled pie, I piled the gifts into the trunk of my old Chevy and hit the road. Beatrice's house was 30 minutes away from mine, in a more upscale neighborhood in Wallingford, a typical suburban house with a manicured lawn and a 2-car garage. Too big for a family of 4, in my opinion, but they were always looking to impress. On the way out, I turned on the radio. A song from the 60s was playing, and I caught myself singing along. My mood was elevated. In the long months of being alone, I'd almost forgotten what it was like to look forward to something. Parking in front of my daughter's house, I took a deep breath. "It's going to be okay," I said to myself. And with that thought in hand, holding a pie and bags of gifts, I headed for the front door, hoping that this Thanksgiving would be the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. The door opened before I could press the bell. Beatrice stood on the doorstep, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress. Her dark hair was gathered into a neat bun, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes was playing on her face. "Daddy, you've arrived," she said, in a tone as if she hadn't expected me to actually show up. "Come in. Everyone's getting ready." I crossed the threshold, awkwardly balancing the pie and bags in my hands. Beatrice didn't offer to help, just stepped aside, letting me inside. "I made apple pie," I said, hoping to see some reaction to her mother's recipe. "Mom's recipe." "Oh," was all she said, taking the pie. "Thank you. You can leave your coat here." The hallway had changed since my last visit. There was new furniture, a dark wood console with ornate legs and a large, solid-framed mirror above it. An expensive piece, by the looks of it. On the wall, where the family photos used to hang, there was an abstract painting in muted colors. "Did you renovate?" I asked, taking off my coat. "Just a little update," Beatrice shrugged. Todd felt the house should fit his new position in the company. She led me into the living room where several guests were already gathered. Todd was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, telling a man in a gray suit something. When he saw me, he stopped short. "Ah, Leslie," he nodded. "Glad you could make it." No hug, no handshake. Just that condescending nod as if I were not his wife's father, but a distant acquaintance who'd been invited as a courtesy. "Hello, Todd," I said, trying to keep a positive attitude. "How's work going?" "Fine," he smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes, just like Beatrice's. "I've been promoted to regional manager. I now have 3 offices under me." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's quite an accomplishment." Todd looked at me with slight surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to appreciate the magnitude of his success. "Yes, that's right," he agreed, and turned to his companion and continued. "This is Leslie, Beatrice's father. Leslie, this is Reed, my colleague." Reed shook my hand, politely inquired how I'd gotten here, and almost immediately returned to his conversation with Todd. I was left standing alone in the middle of the room, not knowing where to put myself. Beatrice had disappeared into the kitchen with my pie, and the grandchildren were nowhere to be seen. Looking around, I noticed that the living room, like the hallway, had undergone a makeover. A new leather sofa, a glass coffee table, a modern chandelier hanging from the ceiling like a metal octopus. Everything screamed money and status. "Mr. Hartwood?" I heard a woman's voice and turned around. A young woman stood in front of me with a glass of wine. Her face looked vaguely familiar. "You don't remember me?" She smiled. "I'm Chloe, Beatrice's friend from high school. We met at your daughter's wedding." "Of course, Chloe," I lied, relieved that someone had decided to talk to me. "How are you?" We exchanged a few sentences about the weather and how Wallingford had changed over the years. Chloe was polite, but I felt that she was talking to me out of pity. Her gaze darted over my shoulder, searching for a more interesting interlocutor. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'll look for my husband," she said at last, and slipped away, leaving me alone again. I decided to look for my grandchildren. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I heard muffled voices coming from Abigail's room. The door was ajar, and I peeked inside. Abigail was sitting at her computer, and Pierce was lying on her bed staring at his phone. They hadn't noticed my presence, and I could hear them talking. "Why did Mom even invite him over?" Pierce snorted. "He's always so weird and slow." "I have no idea," Abigail said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Dad said something about keeping family relationships together, especially now." "Now, when they want to ask him for money?" Pierce chuckled, and they both laughed. I felt the blood rush to my face. My own grandchildren talked about me like I was a burden, not a family member. And what was all this talk of money? Was the whole invitation just an excuse to get close to my savings? I wanted to turn around and walk away, get in my car and drive home. But something held me back. Maybe the hope that I was wrong in my suspicions? Or just a reluctance to admit that my own daughter could be so calculating. I coughed, making my presence known. The grandchildren jumped up as if caught in the act. "Grandfather!" Abigail exclaimed with feigned enthusiasm. "We didn't hear you come in." "Hi, guys," I said, trying to hide the pain in my voice. "I brought you guys something." I held out the gift bags to them. They took them with polite smiles, but without much interest. "Thank you, Grandpa," Pierce mumbled, not even looking inside. "Yes, thank you," Abigail echoed. "We open them later, okay?" I nodded, trying not to show disappointment. Once they'd been eager to tear open the wrapping, unable to wait to see what was inside. Now, my gifts were just an obligation to be politely accepted. "Your mom said dinner would be at 6, I said, trying to keep the conversation going. "Do you know what she's cooking?" "Turkey, I guess," Pierce shrugged, already back on the phone. "The usual." "She ordered everything from Wallingford Gourmet," Abigail added. "She didn't have time to cook for herself." I nodded, remembering how Edith always cooked Thanksgiving herself, spending the whole day in the kitchen. Beatrice had helped her, learning the secrets of making the perfect turkey and cranberry sauce. Apparently, those traditions didn't survive. "Well, I'm going downstairs," I said, realizing that my presence was only disturbing them. "I'll see you at dinner." They mumbled something in response, and I walked out, closing the door carefully behind me. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall for a moment, feeling suddenly tired. This day was turning out to be nothing like I had imagined. Walking back downstairs, I noticed that there were more guests. Todd introduced me to a few more of his co-workers, but no one showed any desire to keep the conversation going beyond the bare minimum. I felt like a ghost, invisible to everyone present. Beatrice was fussing around the table, arranging the dishes and glasses. I approached, offering to help. "There's no need, Dad," she cut me off. "I can manage. Why don't you sit down? You must be tired from the road." I obediently sat down in a chair in the corner of the living room, watching the commotion around me. No one approached me. No one inquired about my life. No one asked me how I was doing on my own. I was like an invisible person, an old piece of furniture that had been moved to a corner so it wouldn't get in the way. After a while, Todd loudly announced that it was time for aperitifs. He opened a bottle of champagne and began pouring it into glasses. "I'll pour you a whiskey, Leslie," he said, handing me a glass of the amber liquid. "I know you prefer it." I didn't remember ever telling him my preference, but I took the glass, thanking him. The whiskey was cheap, with a pungent flavor, but I took a sip, not wanting to seem ungrateful. Todd raised his glass, drawing the guests' attention. "To Thanksgiving," he proclaimed, "to family and friends coming together." As they drank, Todd added, as if reminded of my presence, "And of course, thanks to my father-in-law for coming. At his age, any trip is quite a feat." A few of the guests smiled politely in my direction, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. Todd talked about me as if I were a decrepit old man unable to get around on my own, not a man who still drove his own car and kept house. After the toast, the conversation flowed again without my participation. I sat sipping my whiskey and watching the guests. Among them were two couples about the same age as Beatrice and Todd, obviously their friends who knew the family well. The others were Todd's co-workers, I gathered from scraps of conversation. Beatrice appeared from the kitchen announcing that dinner was ready. Everyone headed for the table, and I rose, following them. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to an older woman who was introduced as the aunt of one of Todd's co-workers. Apparently, I had been found company by age. The table was set beautifully, but without the love that Edith had put into every detail of the dinner. The turkey, served on a silver platter, looked flawless, too flawless to be home-cooked. Abigail's words that the meal had been ordered from a restaurant were confirmed. While Todd carved the turkey, I looked around the living room again. I noticed the new TV on the wall, a huge flat screen like a movie theater. On the mantelpiece were silver-framed photos. Todd and Beatrice at some reception, grandchildren in their school uniforms, a family portrait against the ocean. None of them had me or Edith in them. Beatrice was arranging the food on plates with the help of one of the guests. The grandchildren came down to the table, both with disgruntled faces, as if they had been torn away from something extremely important. They sat down next to each other, away from me. "So," Todd began loudly as everyone got their portions, "let's, as is tradition, say what we're thankful for this year." He started first, thankful for his promotion, for his wonderful family, and for being able to gather all the dear ones around the same table. His words sounded rote, like a speech at a corporate event. Beatrice thanked for stability and prosperity, for the health of the children, and for the opportunity to have guests in our home. Not a word about me. When it was my turn, I felt all eyes drifting in my direction. Suddenly, my throat felt dry. "I'm grateful for—" I began, but my voice shook. I coughed and continued, "for the invitation, for the opportunity to see my grandchildren grow up, and for the memory of Edith, who is always with us." At the mention of Edith's name, Beatrice looked away and Todd gave a barely perceptible wince. My late wife was not a welcome topic in this house. Dinner continued, and the conversation drifted back to the usual course. They discussed politics, the latest movies, plans for Christmas vacation. No one asked me anything, and I ate in silence, occasionally glancing at the grandchildren who were texting under the table, thinking no one noticed. At one point, Todd started talking about his plans for next year. "We're thinking about expanding the house," he said, turning to his co-workers. "Add another wing, a home theater, maybe a pool in the backyard." "Sounds great," Reed said, "but it must be expensive." Todd glanced in my direction. "We have some expectations for the future," he said with a hint in his voice. "Investments that should be about to pay off." I realized he was talking about my money, and a piece of turkey stuck in my throat. I had to wash it down with water to keep from coughing. Beatrice, noticing my reaction, quickly changed the subject. "Speaking of investments," she said, "Pierce won the school's economics contest. You should tell everyone about your project, dear." Pierce reluctantly got off the phone and began to talk in a monotone about some kind of clean energy project. I tried to show interest by asking him about the details, but he answered in one word and returned to his narrative without looking at me. After dinner, Beatrice offered coffee to everyone. I volunteered to help, hoping to have a little private conversation with my daughter. "Sit down, Daddy," she said. "I'll manage." I stayed at the table, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Todd and his co-workers were discussing some kind of deal, and the women were talking about the upcoming holiday sales. The grandchildren asked permission to leave the table and, when they received it, immediately disappeared upstairs. As Beatrice brought in a tray of coffee, I noticed her whispering with Todd. They both glanced in my direction, and I thought I heard the word money. That made it even more uncomfortable. Dessert was served on small plates, not my apple pie, but some kind of elaborate cake with many layers. My pie remained somewhere in the kitchen, forgotten and unwanted like myself. Looking at these people laughing and talking as if I weren't here, I tried to find the strength to believe that things could still get better, that maybe after the guests left, Beatrice and I could have a heart-to-heart talk, that I could find a way to reconnect with my grandchildren, that this was all just a misunderstanding, not a deliberate estrangement. But deep down inside, I knew I was fooling myself. The looks exchanged between Todd and Beatrice, the whispers, the condescension, all of it told me that I was here for one reason only, and that reason had little to do with family ties. As the evening wore on, I felt more and more out of place by the minute. The coffee in my cup went cold, untouched. My apple pie was still not on the table, but everyone was enthusiastically devouring the expensive chocolate cake I had ordered from the pastry shop. "Do you follow the stock market, Leslie?" Suddenly, one of Todd's colleagues, whose name I couldn't remember, approached me. "Not particularly," I answered honestly. At my age, the financial markets seemed too unpredictable. Exactly, Todd said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. That's exactly what I was talking about. Older people don't understand modern economics at all. He looked at me with that condescending smile I hated so much. No respect for risk, he continued. They keep their money under the mattress or, at best, in savings accounts with minimal interest. And then they wonder why their savings are disappearing before their eyes. Several of the guests nodded understandingly, and Beatrice gave me a look that was a strange mixture of irritation and embarrassment. I have no need to risk my money, I said calmly. I have enough of what I have. But you could increase your capital, Todd persisted. Imagine the inheritance you could leave to your grandchildren. There it is, a direct reference to my money and their future destiny. I looked at Beatrice, expecting her to stop this unpleasant conversation, but she merely adjusted the napkin in her lap, avoiding my gaze. I prefer to handle my own finances, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. Of course you do, Todd laughed. It's just that it's hard to make rational decisions at your age. Statistics show that cognitive abilities begin to decline after 65. Several of the guests squirmed uncomfortably in their seats. Even for Todd, it was too rude. Todd, Beatrice said quietly, but it was as if he hadn't heard her. Take technology, for example, he continued. Leslie still uses a push-button phone. She refuses to learn the smartphone. It's a basic necessity in today's world. I have a smartphone, I countered. I just prefer not to use it unnecessarily. You see? Todd looked triumphantly at his colleagues. Typical resistance to progress. And then they complain that young people don't understand them. One of the guests laughed softly, and that was the signal for the others. Soon there was general laughter around the table, as if Todd had told a good joke rather than publicly humiliating me. Did you know that my father-in-law still reads paper newspapers? Todd continued, clearly getting into the swing of things. Every morning he waits for the mailman to bring him the news that's already out of date for the day. The laughter grew louder. I glanced at the grandchildren, hoping to see some sympathy, but Pierce was grinning, and Abigail was looking down at her plate, smiling slightly. He cooks the old-fashioned way, too, Beatrice said, much to my disappointment. No modern kitchen gadgets, all by hand like in the last century. Yeah, we've seen the result, Todd snorted, nodding toward the kitchen where my forgotten pie presumably lay. It looks like it was made in the Stone Age. A new burst of laughter. I sat there, feeling my cheeks burn with humiliation. Not because I was considered old-fashioned, there was no shame in that, but because my closest people had ridiculed me publicly, as if I were not a family member but a character in a joke. Have you heard him tell the same stories over and over again? Todd continued, imitating a shaky, senile voice. When I was young, we used to walk to school in the snow, uphill, both ways. Another explosion of laughter. I'd never said anything like that, but it didn't matter anymore. Todd was creating a caricature, and everyone was happy to play along. And that endless advice he gave, Pierce joined in, suddenly deciding to participate. In my day, we respected our elders. I looked at my grandson with pain. He was 13, and he had already learned to despise me. What had I done to deserve this attitude? Had I simply lived too long? And the funny thing is, Todd said, taking a sip of wine, he still thinks he understands the modern world. The other day he tried to explain to me how insurance works. To me, to a man who's been in the industry for 20 years. Laughter again. I remembered that conversation. Todd had miscalculated the insurance premium for elderly clients, and I simply pointed out the error in the formula. He got angry but admitted I was right. Now the story had become a joke about my alleged incompetence. That's enough, I said quietly. But no one heard me. You know what the sad part is? Todd continued in a slightly drunken voice. He's sitting on a whole fortune and doesn't know what to do with it. $350,000 lying around while we try to make ends meet." There was a sudden silence. Even Todd seemed to realize he had gone too far. Beatrice looked at him with widened eyes, and the guests awkwardly averted their gazes. I slowly placed the napkin on the table. Everything was suddenly crystal clear. The invitation, the fake politeness, the humiliating spectacle, it was all about money. The money left over from the sale of Edith's house. Money they'd already mentally divided between them. "Leslie, Todd's just kidding," Beatrice said quickly, seeing the look on my face. "He didn't mean it." "No, that's exactly what he meant," I replied, surprised at the calmness in my voice. "That's exactly what he meant." I rose slowly from the table. All eyes were on me. Todd looked annoyed, like I was ruining the show. Beatrice looked scared, and the grandchildren looked confused. "You know," I began, addressing the crowd, "I thought inviting you to this dinner was an attempt to mend the relationship. I thought my daughter and her family really wanted me to be a part of their lives." I looked at Beatrice and she lowered her eyes. "But now I see that the only thing you're interested in is the money you'll get when I die." "Papa, that's not true," Beatrice began, but I held up my hand, stopping her. "There's no need," I said. "I understand. And I'll take appropriate action." Todd straightened, a wary expression on his face. "What do you mean?" he asked, and for the first time that evening there was no condescension in his voice, only alarm. "I mean," I answered, feeling strangely light, "that I'm going to call my financial advisor tomorrow and have all my money transferred to a closed-end investment fund, a fund that only I would have access to." Todd's face paled. Beatrice looked at me with her mouth hanging open. "You can't," Todd began. "I can," I interrupted him. "It's my money, and now I can see your true intentions." There was complete silence. The guests froze, not knowing where to look. Todd and Beatrice exchanged panicked glances. Abigail and Pierce stared at their plates. "Leslie, let's not make any rash decisions," one of Todd's co-workers began, apparently trying to lighten the mood. "Todd just had a little too much wine. He didn't mean to offend you." "I'm not offended," I replied. "I just had an epiphany, and I'm grateful for it." I turned to Beatrice. "Thank you for dinner," I said formally. "It was very informative." "Daddy, please," she began, but I was already heading for the exit. In the hallway, I took my coat off the rack. My hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear or anger, from determination. I felt as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for years. The weight of unfulfilled hopes of rebuilding a relationship with a family that saw me only as a source of money. I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Beatrice caught up with me at the door. "Daddy, you can't leave like this," she said, panic in her voice. "Todd didn't mean to hurt you. He was just making a bad joke." "It's not a joke, Beatrice," I said calmly. "It's the truth about how you feel about me and what you want from me. But we're family," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. Whether they were sincere or fake, I couldn't tell. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me today," I said. "Family doesn't ridicule or humiliate. A family doesn't wait for its relatives to die so it can inherit." She took a step back as if I'd hit her. "I never," she started. "You didn't stop him," I interrupted. "You laughed with everyone else. You let your children watch their father humiliate their grandfather. What does that say about you as a daughter? As a mother?" Beatrice lowered her eyes. Todd appeared behind her, his face red with anger and alcohol. "You can't just disinherit us," he said, dropping any pretense of politeness. "It was Edith's money. It was for Beatrice and the children." "Edith wanted the money to go for the good of the family," I answered. "But you're not family. You're vultures circling a dying man. Only I'm not dying yet, and I'm not going to let you get a dime." Todd's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "We can challenge any decision you make. You're an old man. You're out of your mind. Any court will recognize that. Try it, I replied calmly. I'd love to tell the judge about tonight, how my son-in-law publicly mocked my age and my alleged incompetence, and then openly declared that he was waiting for my money. Todd turned pale. Several guests appeared in the doorway of the living room, attracted by the commotion. They looked at us with unconcealed curiosity. There was a dead silence after my statement. I headed for the door, but Todd blocked my path, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. "Wait, Leslie," he said, trying to put a conciliatory tone in his voice. "Let's not make any hasty decisions. I was just making a bad joke." "It wasn't a joke," I replied calmly. "Jokes are funny. What you did was humiliating, and I'm not going to stand for it." Beatrice approached us, her face a mixture of fear and annoyance. "Dad, you're overreacting. Todd had too much wine. He didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to hurt me." I looked her right in the eye. "He made fun of me in front of all your guests, and you laughed with him. You all laughed." The hallway became crowded. The guests, attracted by the noise, crowded around the door, watching our conversation with unconcealed curiosity. Todd noticed them and turned to them with a strained smile. "Friends, a little family misunderstanding. Why don't you get back to dessert? We'll join you shortly." But no one moved from their seats. The situation was too intriguing to just walk away. "Leslie, be reasonable," Todd began again, lowering his voice. "Let's discuss this like adults. Money is an important issue and it can't be handled emotionally." "That's why I'm going to call my financial advisor," I replied, "to resolve this issue without emotion, but with complete clarity about your true intentions." Todd cast a quick glance at Beatrice, as if looking to her for support. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling, "think of the grandchildren. We've always counted on that money for their education." "Really?" I looked at her in surprise. "And I thought you were counting on that money for a home expansion and a home theater. Isn't that what Todd said?" Beatrice gave her husband an angry look but quickly pulled herself together. "We care about the children's future," she said. "Good living conditions are part of their well-being." "What about taking care of me?" I asked. "About my well-being and dignity? About respecting the man who raised you and has always supported you?" She averted her eyes, unable to find something to say. Abigail and Pierce appeared from the living room, intrigued by the commotion. They stopped at the stairs, watching with an expression of confusion. "What's wrong?" Abigail asked. "Is Grandpa leaving?" "Yes, dear," I answered her. "Your grandfather is leaving, and I'm afraid he won't be coming back anytime soon." "Because of Daddy's jokes?" She threw a quick glance at Todd. "He was just fooling around." "No, not because of the jokes," I said, looking at the grandchildren. "It was the lack of respect, because some people only see others as a source of money, not a person." Pierce shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. "But you're not going to leave us without an inheritance, are you?" he asked, and I almost laughed at the bluntness of it. "Pierce," Beatrice exclaimed, "you can't talk like that, but that's all you've been talking about these last weeks." He shrugged his shoulders. "About how Grandpa's money would help us pay off the mortgage and pay for my college." There was an awkward pause. Todd and Beatrice exchanged panicked glances. This house talk was obviously not meant for my ears. "So," I said slowly, "so you were discussing my money, making plans, in front of the kids." "It's not what you think," Beatrice said quickly. "We were just—" "That's enough," I interrupted her. "I get it, and my decision won't change." I turned toward the door, but Todd was blocking my way again. "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice now a blatant threat. "We're not done talking about this." "I am," I answered, looking him straight in the eye, "and I suggest you step aside." "Or what?" he grinned. "Call the police? Complain that we've hurt you?" I felt anger rising inside me, but I held it back. Anger wouldn't help right now. I need a cool head. Not the police, I said calmly. My lawyer, who will be very interested to know that you're holding me against my will. Todd's face contorted, but he stepped aside. I opened the door, feeling the stares of everyone in the room. Dad, wait! Beatrice grabbed my arm. Let's talk normally. Let's not get emotional. We can fix this. I looked at my daughter. There were tears in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were due to remorse or fear of losing the expected inheritance. We haven't had a normal conversation in years, I said. And today, I realized why. We want different things, Beatrice. You want my money, and I want your respect, and neither of us seems to be getting what we want. It's not fair, she exclaimed. We're family. We care about you. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? I asked. When you inquired about my health, when you offered to help me without expecting anything in return. She was silent, her eyes downcast. Exactly, I said. Goodbye, Beatrice. I walked out onto the porch, feeling the cold November air on my face. Behind me, Beatrice was yelling something, but I wasn't listening. I walked to my car feeling strangely light. Grandpa! I heard Abigail's voice and turned around. She was standing on the porch, wrapped in her sweater. Her parents' worried faces loomed behind her. Won't I see you again? She asked, and there was something like genuine sadness in her voice. It's not up to me, I answered. It depends on what you really want. I got in the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see Todd dragging Abigail back into the house and Beatrice standing on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself. As I drove away, I didn't feel an ounce of regret, only relief, as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. When I returned home, the first thing I did was to gather up the things I had left at Beatrice's house. My nightgown, my toothbrush, the book I planned to read before bed. I always stayed the night after Thanksgiving, and I planned to stay this time too. How naive of me to think that this holiday would be the beginning of reconciliation. After putting my things in a small bag, I sat in my chair, looking at my phone. It was silent. Neither Beatrice nor Todd had tried to contact me. Apparently, they had decided to give me time to cool down and come to my senses. They didn't realize that my decision was final. In the morning, I woke up with a clear head and a firm intention. After eating breakfast, I pulled out the business card of Harris Williams, a financial advisor, and dialed his number. Harris Williams speaking, came a businesslike voice. Mr. Williams, this is Leslie Hartwood. We met at George Patterson's funeral. Of course, Mr. Hartwood, he said with a warm note in his voice. What can I do for you? I need advice on an investment fund, I said. Closed-end, restricted access. I understand, he said. When would it be convenient for you to meet? We agreed to meet the next day. I hung up the phone with a sense of accomplishment. Now I just had to wait for Beatrice and Todd's reaction, which I was sure would not be long in coming. Indeed, around noon the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood Beatrice, alone, without Todd. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying. May I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked into the living room and sat on the couch, nervously rubbing the strap of her purse. Dad, I came to apologize, she began. What happened yesterday? It was awful. Todd was out of line. Were you? I asked. You didn't cross any boundaries laughing with him. She lowered her eyes. It was my fault, she admitted. I shouldn't have supported him. But you know Todd, when he starts, he's hard to stop. I know, I nodded, and that's why I don't understand how you could marry a man like that. Beatrice flinched as if I'd hit her. He wasn't always like that, she said. He's just been going through a rough patch at work. He's worried about our financial situation. So much so that he's willing to humiliate your father for money? It's not just about money, she said quickly. We're worried about your future. about how you're doing on your own. Don't lie to me, Beatrice, I said tiredly. Not after yesterday. You're only interested in money. Pierce confirmed it himself. He's a child, he doesn't understand, she objected. Of course we discussed finances. We're having trouble with the mortgage and the children's education is expensive, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. Love is shown in actions, I said, and your actions show only greed and disrespect. Beatrice took a deep breath as if gathering her strength. All right, she said. Let's be honest. Yes, we need the money. Yes, we were counting on your help. But that doesn't change the fact that we're family, that we have a history, a connection. What kind of connection? I asked. We see each other once every 6 months, and that's on an obligation. You don't call, you're not interested in my life. My grandchildren treat me like an outsider. What kind of family is that? She was silent, unable to find anything to object. Listen, I continued more gently. I understand that you have financial difficulties, but it's not my job to solve those difficulties, especially when you treat me like you did yesterday. We can fix this, she said with sudden energy. Socialize more, see each other more often. The kids can spend weekends with you. So I don't disinherit you, I asked bluntly. Beatrice blushed, but didn't look away. That's important too, she admitted. I won't lie. But not only that. I shook my head, feeling endlessly tired of this conversation. You know what the problem is, Beatrice? You view me as an ATM, not as a person. You're not interested in me, my life, my feelings. You're waiting for me to die so you can have my money. That's not true, she exclaimed. It's not? I looked her straight in the eye. Then why was Todd talking about my money as dead weight? Why were you discussing how you were going to spend it like I was already in the grave? She couldn't come up with an answer. I called a financial advisor, I said. I'm meeting with him tomorrow to arrange a transfer to a closed-end investment fund. Beatrice's face contorted with panic. Dad, please don't do this. Let's talk this through. We can come to a compromise. It's too late for compromise, I said. Yesterday, you showed your true colors, and I've made my decision. At that moment, the door swung open and Todd burst into the house. His face was red with anger. Enough of these games, Leslie, he said, not bothering to say hello. You can't just disinherit us. It's Edith's money and it was meant for her daughter and grandchildren. Todd, Beatrice exclaimed. We agreed that I would talk to Dad alone. Did you convince him? Todd snorted. From the look on your face, no. It's time to stop beating around the bush and say it straight. That money has to stay in the family. It will stay in the family, I said calmly. With me. I'm still alive, remember? But you're an old man, Todd exclaimed. What will you do with such a sum? You only need the bare minimum to live on. The rest should go to someone who can make good use of it. Good use? I chuckled. Like a home theater and an expansion of the house? That's a real estate investment, Todd snapped. They'll increase the value of the house. It's a wise investment. Yeah, I nodded. I prefer to invest in my life. Comfort and independence for the rest of my years. You're selfish, Todd said. You think only of yourself, not of your grandchildren's future. And you're a hypocrite, I replied. You think only of the money and not of the person to whom it belongs. Beatrice stepped between us, clearly afraid that the conflict would escalate into something more serious. Enough, both of you, she said. We're not going to get anywhere this way. Todd glared at her angrily but took a step back. Leslie, he began, trying to speak more calmly. Let's be reasonable. This money could secure your grandchildren's future. Isn't that what Edith would have wanted? At the mention of Edith's name, I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Don't you dare mention her name, I said quietly but firmly. You have no right to talk about what she would have wanted. You didn't even really know her. Dad, Beatrice intervened. Mom would want us to be a family, to support each other. Exactly, I said. But we're not a family. You proved that yesterday. and now I accept it as fact and act accordingly. You can't just hand over all the money, Todd said. We can appeal the decision, claim that you're incompetent. Try it, I said calmly. Any doctor will say I'm sane, and any judge will see that you're just greedy people trying to take property from an elderly man. Todd clenched his fists, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit me. But Beatrice put her hand on his shoulder, holding him back. "Come on, Todd," she said. "It's no use." "No," he shook off her hand. "I'm not leaving until he promises to keep the money in the family." "I think you'd better leave," I said, rising from my chair, "or I'll call the police." "You're bluffing," Todd grinned. "You wouldn't call the police on your own daughter." I silently pulled out my cell phone and started dialing. Todd watched me in disbelief, but when I put the phone to my ear, his face changed. "Okay," he said, backing toward the door. "We'll leave. But this isn't over, Leslie. You'll regret your decision." "The only thing I regret," I replied, "is not seeing your true nature sooner." Beatrice gave me one last pleading look, but I was adamant. They walked out, slamming the door loudly. I sank into the chair, feeling my hands shaking, not from fear, but from tension and determination. The phone in my hand rang, making me flinch. It was Harris Williams. "Mr. Hartwood, I got off early. We can meet today if it's convenient for you." "Perfect," I replied. "The sooner the better." After packing, I got into my car and drove to Williams' office. On the way, I thought about life, about the decisions that had brought me to this point, about my marriage to Edith, the birth of Beatrice, the joys and difficulties of raising a daughter, how everything changed after Edith's death, how I'd allowed myself to become invisible in the lives of my own family. But things will be different now. I will no longer live my life expecting crumbs of attention from people who only see me as a source of money. I'm going to start living for myself, to manage my time and money as I see fit. And that thought filled me not with bitterness, but with a wonderful sense of freedom and determination. The meeting with Harris Williams was quick and efficient. He was exactly the kind of professional I expected to see, businesslike, competent, no questions asked. I outlined my situation as specifically as possible. I wanted to transfer all of my money from the sale of Edith's house into a closed investment fund to which only I would have access. "I understand, Mr. Hartwood," Williams nodded, making notes in his notebook. "I can suggest several options that meet your requirements." We discussed possible investment strategies, the degree of risk, potential returns. In the end, I chose a conservative option that would provide me with a stable income in the coming years without unnecessary risks. "Excellent choice," Williams approved. "I will prepare all the necessary documents by the end of the week. But we can start the transfer process today, if you are sure of your decision." "I'm absolutely sure," I replied. "The sooner the better." That same day, I signed the preliminary documents and the process was set in motion. Williams assured me that in a week everything would be formalized and I would have full control over my investment. When I returned home, I felt an extraordinary sense of relief, as if I had shed a heavy weight I had been carrying for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny, not a passive observer waiting for attention from my own family. The phone rang several times. Beatrice was trying to reach me, but I didn't answer. I needed time to process what had happened and decide how to move on. The next morning, I woke up with a clear understanding of what I wanted to change in my life. For years, I had existed waiting for my relationship with my daughter and grandchildren to work itself out. I had given up my desires, my interests, my friendships, all for the illusion of family ties. It was time to return to the real me. The first thing I did was call Robert King, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. We had once been inseparable, working together at a construction company, spending weekends together, fishing, going to baseball games. But after Beatrice started insinuating that Robert was a bad influence on me, I gradually cut back on contact with him, hoping to earn my daughter's approval. "Leslie?" Robert's surprised voice on the phone warmed my soul. "Is that you, you old bugger?" "I am, Bob," I answered, smiling. "How are you? We talked for almost an hour." Robert talked about his life, about his grandchildren who, unlike mine, visit him regularly, about fishing, which he still enjoys despite his arthritis. "Listen," I said as the conversation came to an end. "How would you like to go fishing this weekend? Just like old times." "Hell, yes, of course I do," Robert exclaimed. "I thought you'd never suggest it." Having agreed on the details, I hung up the phone with a sense of anticipation. Fishing. The kind of simple joy I'd deprived myself of for years for fear of disappointing Beatrice. The next item on my getting back to life list was home remodeling. For years I had put it off, saving every penny as if my grandchildren's lives depended on it. Now that I had decided to manage my money on my own, it was time to make my home truly comfortable. I called in a repair crew who could start work as early as next week. We discussed replacing the leaky roof, installing a new heating boiler, and renovating the bathroom. All things I'd been putting off for years, afraid of wasting the family money. "Would you like to renovate the kitchen too, Mr. Hartwood?" the foreman asked, looking at my old kitchen set. I wondered. Edith had loved this kitchen, had chosen every cabinet, every knob, but it had been years and everything looked worn, outdated. "Yes," I said firmly. "Completely renovate the kitchen, but keep this cupboard." I pointed to the antique oak cupboard Edith had inherited from her mother. "It stays." The foreman nodded understandingly and made a note in his clipboard. When the repairman left, leaving me with the estimate and the contract, I sat down at the computer. It was time to do another long-postponed thing, to sign up for a local hobby club. For several years, I'd been looking at the ads for jazz meetings at the Wallingford Cultural Center, but I'd been hesitant to go, partly because of busy family matters, partly out of fear of starting something new at that age. But now that I had decided to live for myself, it was the right time to give it a try. I found the club's website and sent an application to attend the next meeting. The reply came surprisingly quickly. I was invited to a meeting the following Wednesday. The phone rang again. Beatrice. This time I decided to answer it. I had to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. "Yes, Beatrice," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Daddy, at last." I could hear the relief in her voice. "I've been calling you all day. Todd and I were so worried." "Really?" I couldn't hide my skepticism. "I thought you were only worried about my money." "Daddy, please," she said, a pleading tone in her voice. "Let's not go through this again. We talked to Todd, and he realized he was wrong. He wants to apologize in person." "I don't think that's necessary," I replied. "I've already made a decision about my finances, and I'm not going to change it." "But, Dad," she hesitated, "we're a family. We shouldn't let money come between us." "It's interesting that you didn't bring up family until after I decided to put my money in a closed-end fund," I said. "Before that, I didn't see much desire to maintain family relations." "That's not fair," she exclaimed. "I've always taken care of you. We invited you to holidays. We called you." "You invited me out of duty, not love," I interrupted her. "Called once a month to make sure I was still alive and that the money wasn't gone. That's not caring, Beatrice. It's a calculation." She was silent, and I could hear her heavy breathing. "What do you want from us?" she finally asked. "Do you want us to come every weekend? For the kids to spend more time with you? We can organize all that." "See, that's the problem," I sighed. "You see communicating with me as an obligation that needs to be organized, like a deal, your attention in exchange for my money. No, that's not what I meant." "That's exactly what I meant," I said firmly. "And you know what? I don't need this kind of relationship anymore. I deserve better." "Daddy, please," tears came into her voice. "Don't push us away. We can fix this." "I'm not pushing you away," I said softer. "I'm just stopping clinging to the illusion. If you or the kids ever want to see me without any financial motive, my door is always open. But I won't play your games anymore. Is that a final decision? She asked after a pause. Yes, I replied. I've already arranged the transfer of money and started a new life. A weekend of fishing with Robert was exactly what I needed. We drove out early in the morning to a lake 20 miles outside of town, bringing tackle, a thermos of coffee, and sandwiches I'd made from an old recipe. Damn it, Leslie, you haven't lost your cooking skills, Robert exclaimed, taking a big bite of the roast beef sandwich. Edith would be proud. She'd say I put too much mustard on it, I grinned. And she'd be right, Robert laughed. But that's what makes them so damn tasty. On Wednesday, I attended the jazz club for the first time. The meeting was held in a small room at the Wallingford Cultural Center. About 20 people of all ages gathered to listen to rare recordings and discuss the work of Duke Ellington. Newcomer? A gray-haired woman with bright blue eyes asked me as I hesitantly stopped at the entrance. Yeah, first time here, I admitted. Then come sit next to me. She patted the chair next to her. I'm Eleanor, former music teacher, current fan of all things jazz. The evening was surprisingly interesting. I learned a lot about music I've always loved but never studied in depth. After the main part of the meeting, several people, including Eleanor, invited me for coffee at a nearby cafe. A week later, Beatrice and Todd showed up on my doorstep unannounced. I had just returned from Robert's, where we had discussed an upcoming trip to Vermont. We wanted to talk, Beatrice said, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. You're not answering your cell phone. Come in. I stepped aside to let them in. I'm listening. Todd looked unusually shy, avoiding my eyes. Beatrice, on the other hand, was collected and determined. Daddy, we've thought a lot about what happened, she began, and we admit we were wrong. Todd shouldn't have talked about you like that at dinner. I shouldn't have laughed. We're both sorry. I sincerely apologize, Leslie, Todd said, and to my surprise, there was sincerity in his voice. My behavior was inexcusable. I looked at them carefully, trying to figure out what was behind it. Had they really realized their wrongdoing, or was this another attempt at manipulation? I appreciate your apology, I finally said, but what's next? What's going to change? Beatrice sighed. We want a relationship, she said. A real relationship, without ulterior motives. I realized I'd lost my father by focusing on the money instead of the man. And how do you envision that? I asked, still remaining skeptical. We don't know, Beatrice admitted honestly, but we want to try. Maybe we could start with weekly dinners. No talk of money, inheritance, investments, just family get-togethers. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to believe them, to give them another chance. The other part reminded me of years of neglect and manipulation. I'm willing to give it a try, I finally said. But on my terms. No pressure, no financial talk, and I won't change my mind about the foundation. We understand, Beatrice nodded. It's your money, and you have the right to use it as you see fit. I don't know how sincere their words were, but I decided to give them a chance. Not for their sake, but for my own sake. Not to live with bitterness and resentment, to keep some connection with my grandchildren. But at the same time, I firmly knew that I would not let them manipulate me anymore. I would continue to live my life, going to the jazz club, hanging out with Robert and new friends, traveling, enjoying my renovated home. I would be open to a real relationship, but I would not sacrifice my happiness and dignity for the illusion of family bonds. And this decision brought me peace and confidence. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from manipulation, free from guilt, free from having to conform to other people's expectations, free to live the way I want to live and be who I want to be. And that freedom was worth all the money in the world.